Picture this. You're a tournament director. You've spent months building your event from the ground up. Court assignments locked in, schedule finalized, ticket pricing calibrated to the exact same ranking system that has governed professional tennis for over 50 years. You've got Iga Swiatek, Aryna Sabalenka, Coco Gauff, the biggest names in women's tennis, all confirmed and slotted exactly where the numbers say they should go. Everything is airtight. Everything makes sense. And then your phone rings. Not from a former Grand Slam champion, not from a world number one, from a 20-year-old from the Philippines ranked 42nd in the world, who hasn't won a major title, who hasn't even broken into the top 30 consistently, and suddenly every single assumption you built your event around starts to shake. Not crack, shake. Because the moment her name enters the picture, everything you thought you understood about how this sport works gets tested. That is not a hypothetical. That is the actual situation playing out across the entire WTA circuit right now. Tournament directors, scheduling teams, ticketing departments, they are all quietly recalibrating around one player who on paper, the ranking system says, is still just another mid-tier professional grinding her way up the ladder. But the real world? The real world already moved on without asking the ranking system for permission. The name at the center of all of it is Alexandra Eala. Alex to the hundreds of thousands of fans who follow her across every time zone, who set alarms in the middle of the night to watch her play, who fill arenas in cities she has never even lived in. And what's happening around her right now isn't just a feel-good story about a rising star from Southeast Asia. It is something much stranger and much more significant than that. It is a 20-year-old from Quezon City, Philippines, actively dismantling the logic that has run professional tennis for 5 decades, and the sport's own infrastructure is visibly struggling to keep up. We are going to walk through the entire picture, where she came from, the moment that put her on the map, the crowds that broke the system, the peers and journalists and industry insiders who started using words like crazy and phenomenon and most important player in the sport, and the brutal stretch of clay court tennis happening right now that will determine whether all of that momentum becomes something permanent or just the most compelling story of the season that never quite got finished. But to understand any of it, you have to go back to the very beginning. And the beginning is a concrete tennis court in Pasig City, a little girl who could barely hold the racket, and a grandfather who showed up every single day. Alexandra Eala was born on May 23, 2005 in Quezon City, Philippines, into a family that understood exactly what it cost to compete at the highest level of sport. Her mother, Riza Maniego Eala, was a competitive swimmer who represented the Philippines in the 1985 Southeast Asian Games. Her father, Mike Eala, was deeply embedded in the country's tennis community. Her older brother, Miko, would go on to play collegiate tennis at Penn State. So when Alex picked up a racket for the first time at the age of 3.5, nobody in that household told her it was just a hobby. Her first coach wasn't a famous name. He wasn't attached to a high-performance academy or an international federation program. He was her grandfather, Roberto Maniego, Lolo Bob as she called him, and he showed up every single day on the shell courts of Valley Verde Country Club in Pasig City for almost a decade. He was the one who drilled her, the one who set the standards, the one who told her, in words she still carries with her now, "Alex, you need to be coachable, learn how to work with others, keep your feet on the ground." She trained with her grandfather and her brother every day from the age of 3.5 until she was 13 years old, 10 years of daily work before the world had ever heard her name. The Philippines is not a tennis country. That's not a criticism, it's just a fact. The sport has never had the infrastructure, the funding, or the cultural footprint that it has in Spain or France or the United States. There are no household names in Philippine tennis history that echo globally. No pathway that a young girl could look at and say, that is the road from here to Wimbledon. Alex Eala was building that road herself, often without a map, coached by her grandfather on courts that had no connection to the elite world she was quietly moving towards. And then, at 12 years old, she went to France and won Les Petites As.
If you don't know that tournament, you need to understand what it is. Le Petit As is held annually in Tarbes, France, for players aged 12 to 14. It is the most prestigious junior tennis event in the world at that age group, and its list of past champions reads like a who's who of the sport's greatest careers. Rafael Nadal won it, Martina Hingis won it, Kim Clijsters won it, Juan Carlos Ferrero, Yelena Ostapenko, Bianca Andreescu. All of them won Le Petit As as kids before they went on to win Grand Slams as adults. The tournament is essentially the earliest possible signal that a junior player might be something exceptional. Alexandra Eala won it in 2018 at the age of 12. And that win changed everything. The Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain, one of the most elite tennis development programs on the planet, reached out. They had seen what she did in Tarbes. They wanted her to come for a trial week. Her entire family, her parents, her brother, and her, flew to Spain to see if it was real, to see if she actually belonged in that environment. And on the way from the airport to the academy in Mallorca, in the middle of the Madrid airport, they ran directly into Rafael Nadal himself. Her family chased him down. That is not an embellishment. That is what happened. They spotted one of the greatest athletes in human history walking through the airport, and the Eala family, this close-knit Filipino clan, who had traveled across the world on the hope that their 12-year-old daughter might earn a spot at his school, ran up to him and asked for a photo. Nadal said yes. They got the picture. And then, a few days later, after the trial week, the academy made it official. Alexandra Eala had a spot. At 13 years old, she left Quezon City, left her family, left everything familiar, and moved alone to Mallorca, Spain, to train full-time at an institution that had produced some of the best players on the planet. While other kids her age were going to school dances and worrying about exams, she was running drills on clay courts in the Mediterranean heat, learning to compete against the best junior players in Europe, building the physical and mental foundation for a career that had no guaranteed outcome. She didn't know if it would work. She couldn't know. What she had was the discipline her grandfather installed in her, the athletic bloodline her mother and father gave her, and a belief in herself that was quiet enough to look like humility, but deep enough to survive years of grinding in near-complete anonymity. She graduated from the Rafa Nadal Academy in 2023. The photo from that graduation has become something of a talking point in tennis circles since. Standing right next to her during the ceremony, also graduating from the Academy's advanced program, was Iga Świątek, the five-time Grand Slam champion who would, less than 2 years later, face Alexandra Eala across a net in Miami and lose. But before Miami, there were years of silence, and those years matter more than most people realize. Here is the part of Alexandra Eala's story that the highlight reels almost never show you because it doesn't have a clean narrative arc and it doesn't fit on a thumbnail. After winning Le Petit As at 12 and earning her spot at the Rafa Nadal Academy, she kept climbing through the junior ranks and reached levels that most young players never touched. In 2020, she won the Australian Open girls doubles title alongside Indonesia's Priska Madeline Nugroho. In 2021, she added the French Open girls doubles title with Oksana Selekhmetova. And in 2022, she went a step further and won the US Open Girls Singles Championship, becoming the first Filipino to win a Grand Slam junior title of any kind. 3 junior Grand Slam titles, a Le Petit As win. By any measure of junior tennis, she was among the most accomplished young players of her generation. She also acknowledged, with a clarity that said a lot about her character, that it didn't necessarily mean anything at the professional level. She said it herself in interviews during that period. Being a successful junior doesn't mean you are a successful professional. The sport is full of junior champions who never made it, players who peaked at 17 and spent the rest of their careers chasing that one moment. Eala knew the data. She knew what the transition required, and she started her professional journey without any guarantee that the junior results would translate. She made her WTA Tour debut in the 2021 Miami Open qualifying draw, lost in the first round, and went back to the grind. She spent 2022 and 2023 working through ITF circuit events, the small tournaments, the ones that don't make international headlines, with prize money so modest that a round-trip flight to the venue could eat most of what you earned. She was competing in places like Chiang Rai and Yekla and Roehampton, picking up ITF titles and accumulating ranking points a few at a time, slowly, patiently, with no fanfare and no viral moment to accelerate the timeline.
By the end of 2024, after years of that grind, her year-end ranking was number 143. She had a few ITF titles, she had a handful of WTA main draw appearances, she had reached the second round at the WTA 1000 Madrid event in 2024 and played the main draw in Abu Dhabi, Guangzhou, Wuhan, and Guadalajara. Not exactly the marquee result package of a future star. If you were a casual tennis fan at the end of 2024 and someone mentioned the name Alexandra Eala, there is almost no chance you knew who she was unless you were Filipino or deeply embedded in the world of junior tennis development. Outside the Philippines, she was invisible. The ranking system had no particular reason to care about her. The WTA scheduling teams had no particular reason to think about her. She was just another promising-ish professional working her way up a sport full of promising-ish professionals, most of whom never break through, most of whom spend 5 or 6 years grinding and then quietly step away. And then March 2025 happened, and everything changed so fast it left the entire tennis world standing still with its mouth open. The 2025 Miami Open, Hard Rock Stadium, the BNP Paribas Open's sister event, a WTA 1000 tournament, one of the biggest on the calendar outside the Grand Slams. The draw features the best players in the world: Aryna Sabalenka, Iga Swiatek, Madison Keys, Coco Gauff, Jessica Pegula, the names you would expect at a tournament of that magnitude. And tucked into the draw as a wildcard entry, Alexandra Eala, ranked number 140 in the world. A wild card at Miami means the tournament organizers chose to give her a spot in the main draw as a gesture of goodwill, an invitation extended by the tournament itself, not earned through her ranking. It was a kind of vote of confidence from the Miami Open's local organizing team, who were aware of the Filipino community in South Florida and understood the attendance potential. But nobody, not the broadcasters, not the analysts, not the other players, not even most Filipino fans who knew exactly who she was, expected what was about to unfold over the next 2 weeks. Her first match was against world number 23 Katie Volanets. She won, routine enough. Then came Jelena Ostapenko, the 2017 French Open champion, seeded 25th. Eala was down 4-0 in the first set. The match looked like it was going to end before it started. She won 7-6, 7-5. Then came Madison Keys, the reigning 2025 Australian Open champion, world number 5. Eala beat her 6-4, 6-2. Back-to-back Grand Slam champions, taken down in straight sets. Then a walkover when Paula Badosa withdrew in the 4th round, giving Eala extra rest before the quarterfinal. Her quarterfinal opponent was Iga Swiatek, world number 2, 5-time Grand Slam champion, the most dominant player in women's tennis for most of the previous 4 years, the woman who was standing next to Eala at their graduation ceremony from the Rafa Nadal Academy less than 2 years earlier. The score? 6-2, 5-7. Eala won in 1 hour and 37 minutes. She broke Swiatek 8 times. Swiatek committed 32 unforced errors. After the match, Swiatek, who is not known for handing out compliments freely, stood in the press room and said she was really aggressive and she kept her focus, and some of these shots were pretty out of nowhere. That is about as close to stunned as one of the world's best players ever sounds in a post-match conference. What Eala had just done had never been done before in WTA history. She became the first wildcard entry to defeat 3 Grand Slam champions in straight sets at a single event, ever. Since WTA rankings began in 1975, she was the first woman from the Philippines to beat a top 30 player. She did it 3 times in 8 days. The prize money she collected from that 2-week run was nearly 2/3 of her entire career prize money coming into the tournament. She went from ranked number 140 to approximately number 75 overnight. She secured her first ever Grand Slam main draw entry for Roland Garros.
And then her phone started blowing up. Nadal sent her a message on Instagram. She saw it late, panicked slightly about not responding fast enough, and later admitted she felt genuinely stressed about leaving the greatest clay court player in history on read. Nadal posted publicly, "Congratulations, Alex. What a great win for you and for the Philippines." The Philippines itself, the entire country, erupted. Social media filled with Filipino flags. Sports commentators who had spent their careers covering boxing and basketball were suddenly talking about tennis. Comparisons to Manny Pacquiao, the country's most iconic sports figure, started appearing in headlines. Dion Castillejo, sports journalist and former tennis player, observed that fans were already treating Alex as if she had won a Grand Slam. She hadn't. She had reached a semifinal and lost to Jessica Pegula in 3 sets. But the cultural moment had already broken through the sporting result. Something much larger than tennis was happening, and the sport was only just beginning to understand what it was dealing with. Fast forward to January 2026, the Australian Open. Melbourne Park, the biggest hard-court Grand Slam on the calendar, with courts equipped to handle the most sophisticated scheduling operation in world tennis. Tennis Australia's system is extremely good at what it does. It reads the rankings. It reads the seedings. It assigns players to courts based on a logic that has been refined over decades. It is almost never wrong. Alexandra Eala arrived in Melbourne for her first ever Australian Open main draw, ranked number 49 at the time. The system looked at those numbers, did exactly what it was designed to do, and assigned her to Court 6. Sensible, reasonable, correct by every metric the system had available to it. Nobody questioned the decision. Court 6 was fine. Court 6 is a perfectly good outer court that holds a few hundred people comfortably. For a first-round debutante ranked just outside the top 50, it was the right call. And then the crowd arrived. Melbourne's Filipino community is one of the largest Filipino expat populations anywhere outside the Philippines itself. Tens of thousands of Filipino Australians who had been watching Alexandra Eala's rise from a distance, who had been waiting for the moment she walked onto a Grand Slam main draw court, showed up. Not in hundreds, in thousands. Court 6 was overwhelmed before the match had even started. Security couldn't contain it. People who couldn't physically get inside stood outside and watched on whatever screens they could find. And inside, during the match, not between sets, not between games, but during live points, with the ball in play, the crowd was so loud that the chair umpire had to address it publicly. Think about that for a second. The kind of atmosphere you associate with a Wimbledon final, with a packed center court in the 5th set of a match between 2 legends, materialized on an outer court at 10 in the morning at the Australian Open for a first-round match involving a player ranked 49th in the world. Tennis Australia issued a public statement, an official acknowledgement that the system had been caught completely flat-footed. The machine had failed on global cameras because it had no algorithm for Alexandra Eala, no variable in its formula for the reality that had just shown up in Melbourne. And what the tennis world remembered afterwards wasn't the match result. It was the gap. the enormous, undeniable, publicly documented gap between where the ranking system said she should be and where the real world had already decided to place her. Ben Rothenberg was in Melbourne. If you follow professional tennis at the journalism level, you know that name. Former New York Times tennis correspondent, author of the newsletter Bounces, considered one of the most credible English-language voices covering the sport, full stop. He is known specifically for getting things right, for measured takes, for the kind of precision that makes his assessments carry real weight in the tennis world. He does not do hot takes. His professional reputation is built entirely on accuracy.
The morning after the Court 6 scene, Rothenberg posted something that stopped the tennis internet cold. He said he was genuinely asking himself whether Alexandra Eala was already the most popular player in women's tennis. Then he sat down and wrote a full newsletter piece, and he answered his own question. The title was direct. Alexandra Eala is the most popular player in tennis right now. Not the most popular emerging player, not the most popular player from Southeast Asia, the most popular player in tennis. Full stop. Present tense. From a journalist whose entire professional identity is built on not overstating things. That is not a fan talking. That is not a Filipino media outlet running a feel-good story about one of their own. That is a verdict from someone who has covered this sport at the highest level, who was physically present for what happened on Court 6, and who decided that the honest thing to do was say what he actually saw. But Melbourne was just the opening act. What happened next would make it look like a preview. 3 weeks after the Australian Open, the tour moved to Abu Dhabi for the Mubadala Abu Dhabi Open, a WTA 500 event in early February. Eala arrived on a wild card, not seeded, not listed among the tournament's headline names. The same situation as Miami the year before, in a different city on a different continent, with the same result in terms of what she did to that building's atmosphere at the moment she walked in. She filled the stadium, without a seeding, without a top 30 ranking, without a title to her name at that level. She just walked in and the place filled up, because that is what happens wherever she goes now. The match she played there became the kind of match that gets embedded in a player's mythology. She was playing her way through the draw when she found herself in a third set against Alexandra Sosnovic, down 4-0, then 5-2. A match point came. The crowd, already roaring, went absolutely still for a second. She saved it, and then she did the thing that people who have watched her for years will tell you is her defining quality. She found another level. She won 7-6 in the third. 2 sets and a match point down, she found the door and walked through it. And when she stepped up to the microphone for her on-court interview, still breathing hard, the crowd still absolutely losing it behind her, she said 4 words that cut straight through everything. Selling out stadiums is insane. That's it. No speech, no polished athlete persona, no carefully assembled media training response. Just a 20-year-old who looked out at a packed arena somewhere in the United Arab Emirates on a weeknight in February and was genuinely, visibly, almost bewilderedly surprised that she fills rooms like that. That authenticity, that completely unfiltered disbelief at her own story is more powerful than anything a marketing team could manufacture for her. Because you can't fake that. You can't script the expression on someone's face when they actually cannot believe where they are. And the entire tennis internet watching the clip get shared tens of thousands of times understood exactly what they were seeing. It was in the days after Abu Dhabi that Daria Seville posted the video that sent the tennis world into overdrive. Seville is not a retired legend offering soft, nostalgic praise from a commentary booth somewhere. She is an active WTA professional, former world number 21, former Australian women's number 1. She has spent well over a decade grinding through the same draws, traveling to the same tournaments, competing in the same locker rooms as every elite name in this sport. She knows what real crowds at real WTA events look like. She knows the baseline. She knows what normal is.
She posted an Instagram reel reacting to the Abu Dhabi footage, and what she said was something that the tennis world had simply not heard from a direct competitor. She said Alex Eala sells out stadiums whether she is playing singles or doubles. She said you can literally see it in the crowd numbers. You can watch a match start with a partially full arena, and the moment Eala walks on the court next door, the numbers shift visibly. You can see people leaving one court to go watch Alex. And then she said the thing that nobody expected from someone in her position.
She said that if she were a tournament director, she would do absolutely anything to have Eala at her event. She would put her on the schedule every single day, singles and doubles, because people come to watch Alex, and then they stay for more tennis. Sit with that for a moment. A fellow professional, someone who uses a different racket brand, who is not Filipino, who competes in the same draws and has her own career and her own goals, watched the crowds that surround Alex and publicly told the world that she would reorganize an entire professional tennis event around one player who has never won a major title. That is not admiration. That is not the polite compliment you give a peer in an interview. That is a professional read from someone who knows this landscape intimately and is telling you, with zero personal incentive, that something categorically unusual is happening inside the sport she has dedicated her life to. And the industry insiders were not far behind with their own verdicts. By March 2026, the pattern had become impossible to explain away with any single narrative. At Indian Wells, the BNP Paribas Open, one of the biggest combined events on tour, Eala was reportedly drawing practice session crowds that outpaced those watching Carlos Alcaraz and Coco Gauff. Not bigger than one of them, bigger than both of them at the same time, at practice. Alcaraz and Gauff are arguably the two biggest box office names in tennis at the moment, and Eala was pulling more people to watch her hit ground strokes in a practice session than those two legends of the current era were pulling combined. She told Front Office Sports after her first round win there that she never expected a fan base like this, that it is an incredible privilege that not everyone gets to experience, and the way she said it, still grateful, still slightly disoriented by the scale of it all, made the whole thing feel more real, not less. Because she wasn't performing gratitude, she was actually surprised. And that surprise, 2 years into being arguably the most watched player on the WTA Tour, is one of the more remarkable things about her as a person. Then came the Forbes piece in March 2026. Jean-Christophe Verbag, the global sports marketing director for Babolat, the French racket brand that sponsors Eala, the same brand that once sponsored Li Na, sat down for an interview and was asked about what he is watching unfold. He chose one specific word: crazy. Now, why does that matter? Because Verbag is not a journalist speculating from the outside. He is the man who was inside Babolat's boardroom in 2011 when Li Na won the French Open and over 116 million people in China watched the final. He watched Li Na walk into a country that had almost no tennis culture and transform it into the WTA's single largest market. He watched her generate endorsement income worth $24 million a year. He watched her make China not just a tennis audience, but a tennis country, a place where kids grew up wanting to play the sport because they could see themselves in a champion. He witnessed that phenomenon from the inside, at close range, as the executive responsible for managing the brand that carried Li Na's name on the strings. And now he is watching Alexandra Eala. From a nation of 115 million people at home and 10 million more scattered across diaspora communities, already filling stadiums from Melbourne to Abu Dhabi to Indian Wells to Stuttgart. And the word he reaches for is the same one he probably reached for when he first started to understand what Li Na was doing to Chinese tennis. Crazy. Not a marketing superlative, not a press release word. Pattern recognition from a man who has personally watched this exact phenomenon unfold before, in a different country, on a different continent, and now he is watching it happen again. The Li Na comparison, done correctly, is not about playing style or Grand Slam dreams. It is about the map. Li Na did not just win in China, she made tennis a viable ambition for an entire generation of Chinese kids who had never seen themselves reflected in the sport. She gave them a professional pathway where one barely existed. She changed what was possible for 1 billion-plus people by winning on the biggest stage. Alexandra Eala is doing the same thing, and she hasn't won a major yet. In January 2026, the WTA sanctioned the first-ever professional women's tennis tournament held on Philippine soil. The Philippine Women's Open, a WTA 125 event, took place from January 26 to January 31, 2026. The WTA itself called the inaugural edition a resounding success. Eala competed as a wildcard and reached the quarterfinals before losing to eventual champion Camila Osorio. And afterward, talking to the New York Times, she said something that put the whole thing in its proper frame. She said that having the tournament at home was such a big thing because it is such a milestone for women's tennis in the Philippines and tennis in the Philippines in general.
Think about what that event means for a 12-year-old girl in Quezon City or Cebu or Davao who picks up a racket next year. She now has a professional tournament in her own country. Not inspiration, infrastructure, a real pathway, a sanctioned WTA event on Philippine soil where she can watch professionals compete without a 12-hour flight, where she can see what the destination looks like, where she can start to believe that the road from a shell court in Pasig Street leads somewhere real. That is the Li Na comparison done right. Not about winning the French Open, about the map, about changing what a generation of kids believes is possible. The WTA's own communications team has started using language like perfect balance to describe the challenge of managing Eala's media demands alongside her development. That is the most diplomatic possible way of saying, we know we have something extraordinary here, and we are trying very hard not to burn it out. Babolat sees it, the tournament directors see it, the WTA sees it, the journalists see it, the peers see it. But there is a side of the story that almost nobody is talking about in the same breath as the stadiums and the Li Na comparisons, and it is the side that actually determines whether any of this becomes the foundation of something lasting. Because Clay has been exposing her, badly. Here is the version of Alex Eala's 2026 season that does not make the highlight reels. The version that matters if you want to understand what is actually at stake right now, and why the Italian Open and Roland Garros are not just another stretch of tournaments on the calendar, but the most consequential weeks of her career so far. The clay court season started in Linz. She lost in the second round. Then came Stuttgart, the Porsche Tennis Grand Prix, a WTA 500 event. Leylah Fernandez beat her 6-1, 6-4. Not a close match. Then Madrid, the Mutua Madrid Open, a WTA 1000 event, one of the biggest on tour. She beat Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova in the first round on the Arantxa Sanchez Stadium in front of a crowd that was buzzing for her. And then, inexplicably, in the second round, the Madrid tournament assigned her to Court 5. Not a main court, Court 5. The decision drew criticism from multiple corners of the tennis world. The crowd that lifts her, the wall of noise and energy that has carried her through difficult moments in Melbourne and Abu Dhabi and Indian Wells, was simply not there. She lost to Elise Mertens 6-2, 6-1. And at some point during that second set, she received a warning from the chair umpire, and she disputed it. On court, in the middle of the match, she looked up at the umpire and said, "First of all, please let me speak. You need to give me a warning first." The frustration was real. The match was not going her way. The crowd was thin, the surface was hostile, and the official procedure felt like one more thing working against her. Her complaints were ignored. She lost shortly after, and then she withdrew from the Catalonia Open, a WTA 125 Challenger event she had been entered in, before heading back to the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca. That detail, returning to the academy, tells you something important about her. After a brutal clay stretch, after a controversial court assignment, after a match she lost by a combined 7 games, she did not disappear. She did not take 2 weeks off or post a social media statement about needing time to reset. She went back to the place that built her, got back on the practice court, and went to work. That discipline, that almost stubborn refusal to treat a rough patch as a reason to stop, is the same quality her grandfather was trying to install in her on those shell courts in Pasig City 20 years ago. It's the same quality that let her save a match point at 5-2 in the 3rd set in Abu Dhabi. It doesn't guarantee results, but it is the reason former world number 4 Greg Rusedski, when asked about Eala's clay struggles, didn't hedge or offer diplomatic non-answers. He said simply, "She's too good a player. She'll figure it out." And what he pointed to was her resilience. That is not empty optimism from someone who has never played the game. That is an assessment of character from a professional who has spent decades watching players either find a way through difficult stretches or not.
The Italian Open in Rome is clay, the Foro Italico, one of the most beautiful and most demanding clay court venues on the entire tour. And the French Open, Roland Garros, the only Grand Slam left before the seeding cutoff, is also clay. This is the surface that is currently refusing to cooperate. These are the weeks that will define what the momentum of the hard court season actually means. The seeding cutoff for Roland Garros is May 18. A seeded position, top 32 in the world, means that the exact same draw machinery that assigned her to Court 6 in Melbourne and allowed Madrid to put her on Court 5 would finally, structurally, be forced to acknowledge what the crowds have known since January. A seed means a guaranteed spot in the draw's protected half. It means main court assignments by default. It means the system catches up, at least partially, to a reality it has been struggling to process since the Australian Open. She entered Rome as world number 42, ranked higher than she has ever been this deep into a clay stretch. Her first-round opponent is Magdalena Fręch of Poland. The match is set, the surface is set, and the stakes, both for her ranking and for the larger story being written around her, could not be higher. Because here is the tension that nobody at the Foro Italico is talking about openly, but everyone is aware of. The player who has sold out stadiums and broken crowd records and been called the most popular in the sport is coming to Rome without a single convincing clay result to show for the entire season. She has to prove that the version of herself that dismantled Swiatek in Miami and saved match points in Abu Dhabi can exist on a surface that rewards patience and attrition over aggression and electricity. She has to prove that the crowds that follow her are not just the story, they are the fuel that feeds something that can win on any surface, not just the ones that suit her best. Rome is not just a first-round match, it is the beginning of the stretch that either completes this story's first chapter or forces a rewrite. Here is what makes the Alex Eala story genuinely historic, rather than simply exciting. It is not the crowds, as remarkable as they are. It is not any individual result. It is the range and the independence of the voices saying the same thing. Look at who they are. Daria Saville, an active WTA professional, former world number 21, former Australian number 1, someone competing in the same draws with her on her own career on the line, who watched the Abu Dhabi footage and publicly said she would restructure a professional tennis event around this player. Ben Rothenberg, the most respected English-language tennis journalist working today, whose entire professional reputation rests on precision, who wrote a newsletter piece titled "Alex Eala is the most popular player in tennis right now," and stood behind it. Jean-Christophe Verboeg, a global sports marketing executive who was personally inside the boardroom when Li Na transformed Chinese tennis, who watched $24 million annual endorsement deals get built out of one player's cultural resonance, and who looked at Eala's trajectory and reached for the word crazy. The WTA's own senior staff, who are using language chosen carefully to acknowledge something extraordinary without burning the 20-year-old carrying it. A Pepperdine marketing professor, a New York Times tennis writer, tournament directors across the circuit quietly recalibrating their scheduling and ticketing around a player the ranking system still lists at 42. That is not an echo chamber. Echo chambers are full of people with the same incentives saying the same thing. What you have with Alexandra Eala is a convergence. Independent professionals from different corners of the sport with different backgrounds and different financial stakes and different national affiliations arriving at the same observation without coordinating with each other. Convergences of that breadth do not form around accidents. They do not form around novelty or an interesting story that gets a little too much coverage. They form around phenomena, around players and moments that actually change the landscape of a sport. And Alexandra Eala is doing that without a Grand Slam title, without a top 20 ranking, at 20 years old, still working out the clay court side of her game, still navigating the politics of court assignments and scheduling decisions that too often seem to be decided by people who haven't looked at the attendance numbers. She's doing it by being entirely and relentlessly herself, a girl from Quezon City who chased a legend through an airport at 13, who dedicated 10 years of daily practice to a grandfather who told her to stay coachable and keep her feet on the ground, who looked out at a full arena in Abu Dhabi on a Tuesday night in February and said with complete genuine wonder, "Selling out stadiums is insane."
She has already changed the map. The WTA now has a Philippine stop for the first time in its history. A generation of Filipino kids now has a professional tournament at home to look at and believe in. The sports infrastructure is being quietly forced to evolve around a player it did not see coming. And the most credible voices in tennis, not the fans, not the social media accounts, not the Filipino media running their own justifiably proud coverage, are saying independently and loudly that something historic is unfolding in real time. Rome is tomorrow. The clay is waiting. Magdalena Fręch is a tough first-round opponent on a surface that has given Eala nothing but trouble for the past 2 months. And after Rome, Roland Garros. And after Roland Garros, the seeding cutoff that could finally force the ranking system to put her exactly where the real world already placed her months ago. So here is the question, the one that the crowds and the experts and the journalists and the industry insiders are all circling around without quite landing on it cleanly. Is Alexandra Eala already the most important player in women's tennis right now? Not the best, not the highest ranked, not the one with the most titles or the most Grand Slam appearances or the most ranking points sitting in her column. The most important. The stadiums are already full. The experts have already given their verdict. Rome starts now. Let's see what she does with the clay.